Hello everyone, how's it going? In this video, we are going to talk about start activity for result. Alright, so previously we saw that when we open another activity, we can send data to the activity by using an intent or put extra. But what if we also want to get something back? This is what the start activity for result method is used for. By opening our child activity with this method and overriding on activity result, we can send data back to our parent activity after we set it with a set result in our child activity before we close it. So for example, our application can start a camera app and receive the captured photo as a result. Or we might want to start the contacts application in order for the user to select a contact and we get the contact details in our activity as a result. So that is the main advantage of start activity for results. The activity for result API provide components for registering a result, launching the result, and handling the result once it is dispatched by the system. Alright, so we are going to explain this thing by a dummy project. So what we are going to do is I'm going to create a dummy project, and with the help of that, we are going to create two different activities, and we'll launch another activity, and then we'll enter something in the input field on that activity, and then we'll get the result, whatever text the user enters in the input field, and we'll display it on our first activity. So that's sort of an example that we are going to code, and then we'll see how things work. All right, so let's get to the coding part for our activity layout. So we are going to code the layout first for our main activity, right? So I'm going to change the constraint layout to a relative layout. And I'm going to get rid of this namespace. We don't need that anymore. And the layout width and layout height is set to match parent. That is fine. And okay, so I'm going to define a text view. So let's write a text view here, and let's set the Android ID for this. So we're going to set the Android ID attribute ID, and we'll call it let's say and we'll call it, for example, text view 1. It's not that meaningful, but you'll get the idea. All right, so now we're going to define the width, layout width and height attribute for this text view. So we'll call it width, and we're going to set it to wrap content. Oops. And I'm going to define Android height, layout height, and I'm going to set it to wrap content as well. This should be layout width. Let's set this to wrap content. Okay, perfect. And let's set a text for this. So let's call this, for example, get the message. So here we can see our text view is visible here. We're going to do some alignment for this. So I'm going to give a margin top, for instance. Let's give it 42 density pixels. And let's set this to center, layout center, horizontal, and I'll set this to true. So now our view is centered and it has a margin of 42 density pixels from the top. Okay, so next up we are going to define the button that will click on, and on the click of the button we'll get the result from another activity. And we will also create another activity from which we are expecting the result back. So let's define the button first. So button, and let's give it an ID, and let's call it button 1. Let's set the width and height attribute for this, layout width to wrap content and layout height to wrap content as well. Perfect. and we are going to assign, like, place the button below the text view. So I'm going to set a property called layout below with an ID of a text view 1. So this will make our button below the text view, and I'm going to give it some margin top. So margin top of, let's say, 16 density pixels. Center horizontal to make the button center. And I'm going to, like, set a text for this button, and let's call it get message. So that's it. Our button and text view are defined, and now we are going to create our activity 2 from which we are expecting the result back. Alright, so now we are going to create the second activity from which we are expecting the result back. So I'm going to click on File, New Activity, and let's select Empty Activity from this drop-down list. Let's call it Main Activity 2, and I don't want to make it a launcher activity, and we'll leave Generate a Layout File as checked. Click on Finish. So let's go to the layout file and code the layout file for our second activity. So I'm going to change the view to split so that we can see the blueprint as well as the XML part. So I'm going to change constraint layout again to relative layout. And we don't need that namespace, so I'm going to get rid of it. Alright, so let's define an edit text field. And let's set width to wrap content and height to wrap content as well. I'm going to give the ID, and let's say edit text 1. Let's get width to, for instance, 250 density pixels. Yeah, that's perfect. And I'm going to give a margin at top, and it's 40 density pixels. Alright, so let's create a text view. So we'll type text view, layout width and height we'll set it to wrap content. We'll set the text to enter message. We'll set the property align parent left to true, so it will stick to the left of the parent. Margin top, and let's give it 40 density pixels. And we're going to set the edit text to right of our text view. So I'm going to set to right off ID, and it should be to right of our text view 1. Oops, we'll specify the ID here. Let's call it text view 2. Okay, so you can see edit text is placed on the right side of our text view. We're going to give it a margin left, let's say 16 density pixels, just to make it look more nice. And we're going to align baseline bottom to edit text 1. Align bottom to edit text 1. Okay, so we're going to format the code using Control Alt and L, and here we can see we have edit text and the text view right here. So let's give it a margin of, for instance, 12 density pixels. Okay. And now the final thing is we're going to define a button. Wrap content. Okay, so with our layouts defined, now we are going to write the code that invokes another activity or our second activity to get the result back from our main activity, right? All right, so we are going to jump into our main activity. So firstly, we'll get the reference to our views. So we'll get the reference to the text view. Let's call it text view 1, and we'll get the reference to our button that we have defined. So we get the reference to our text view and the button, right? And now we are going to find our views. Let's import a button class. So I'm going to create a function called find views by ID. So let's create this method in our main activity. So this will set text view 1 equal to find view by ID. r.id.text view 1 will pass in the ID for our text view that we have specified in our layout file right here. And in the same way, we are going to find our button using the ID that we have specified in the layout file. And we call it button 1. We can confirm it from the layout file. Here we can see the ID is set to button 1, right? Now we have both of our views. So we're going to set a click listener on button 1, and on click of that button, what we are going to do is we're going to navigate to the second activity. We are going to launch the second activity. We will get the result back from that activity and will display the result in our text view that we have defined right here. So that makes sense, right? All right, so let's register the click for our button. So I'm going to type button 1.set on click listener, and we're going to pass in the implementation of view.onClickListener interface. So over here, what we'll do is we'll invoke the second activity, or invoke the main activity 2. So we are going to start the main activity 2 as a result, and we'll get the result back from this activity, and we'll see how we can do that. All right, so let's start main activity 2, and for that we will use the intent object. So I'll type intent equals a new intent, and I'm going to pass in the reference of our current activity, which is main activity dot this, and the target activity, which is a main activity 2 dot class, right? And we're going to import the intent class. All right, so instead of start activity, we will use another method called start activity for result. And as the name implies, we will get something back from it. So start activity for a result, as this is deprecated now, and we will use the new activity results API in upcoming lectures, right? So start activity for result, and this basically takes 2 arguments. First one being the intent object, and the second one is the request code, which basically identifies our request, and we can pass any number here. So I will pass 1. All right, so now we are going to navigate to our main activity 2, and from there we'll just set the message and send the result back to this activity. So let's go to main activity 2, and here we are going to find our views, or we will get the reference to our button and the edit text box. Private edit text. So we're going to import edit text class. So we'll do the same as we did in main activity 1. Find views by ID. We're going to create this function, and we will say button is equal to find view by ID, r.id. button 2, because this is the ID that we have specified in the layout file for main activity 2. As we can see, we have set the ID for this button 2. And similarly, we are going to set edit text find view by ID r.id.edit text 1. And now we are going to register the click listener on this button. So button dot set on click listener, and I'm going to pass in the implementation of view dot on click listener interface. So when the user clicks the submit button, what we will do is we will run the piece of code that is an on click method. When the button is clicked. So here we will get the message from the edit text field, and we will set it into our string message variable that we have defined here. So edit text dot get text dot to string. So we are going to convert the text into string because this returns a sequence of characters, right? Alright, so now what we are going to do is we are going to send this message to our main activity. So this activity will basically set the result and send it back to the main activity, because the main activity has started this activity for a result, which means that the main activity is expecting a result back. So what we are going to do is we will set the result in an intent object, and we will send the result back to the calling activity, which is the main activity. So we will create an intent object, intent equal a new intent dot put extra, and this is used to save the data into the intent object. We can see it takes a string name, which is the key, and a value, which can be integer, byte, long, character, string, or any other thing. So we will call the key as message, and we will set the value equal to this message. So this message that we have used here, will pass it to the intent object. And now to set the result on this intent object, we will call set result, and we will pass in the same result code that the main activity have specified. So we have set 1 there, and it is expecting the data back, so it will look for the same result code, and then we're going to send the intent object along with it. So using the set result method, we are setting the result, which will be published to the main activity. And then we'll call finish on this activity because we are expecting the result, and after sending the result, the activity will be finished. Alright, so now the question is how we can get the result back to our main activity. So there must be a callback function that we can use, or which is executed whenever the return is received by our main activity. So we do have a callback function, and it's called on activity result. So this is the function that will be executed whenever this activity receives the result which was set by the main activity 2. Alright, so to set the result to our to send the result back to our main activity, what we can do is we can call a function which is a set result, and this function expects a result code and an intent data, right? So the result code is basically an integer value. So the result code is used to check if our request is successful or not, and the default values for these are let me show you the default values. And the default values for these are result cancelled, result okay, and result first user. So if everything goes well, we'll set result okay, and result cancelled will be set automatically if, for instance, a back button is pressed or if we do not set the result at all. So we are going to set result OK, and then we'll pass in the intent object. And if we go to the documentation, we can see we have the standard activity result operation succeeded, and a result first user is used if we want to send something custom. For example, this is the user defined activity results. All right, so here we can see this function is called with the request code, the result code, and the data. So here we can check if the result code is equal to result OK, which means everything is perfectly fine. And we can also check if the request code is the same as what is passed here. So what we passed here, it should be the same as the request code. So here we can type request code equals 1, and then we can extract the data from the intent object. String message is equal to data dot get string extra, and here we'll pass in the key, and this key is the same that we used while setting the data to the intent object. And then simply we can set the data to our text view. So text view dot set text, and we'll pass in the message. All right, so that's it for our program, and now we can run the code and we can see what output do we get. So to run the program, we are going to click on this run app icon, which is on the top of the screen. So we'll wait for the build to finish. All right, so our application is up and running, and when we'll click on the get message, this will call main activity 2 to get the result from that activity. So once I click on get message, here we can see we are on main activity 2, and I'll send some text back. So we'll write hello world, and when I click on submit button, we should see the result back on main activity. So if I click submit, and here we can see we have hello world printed right here, and this is the result that we were expecting from main activity 2 since it was launched using start activity for result. So here we can see start activity for result is deprecated, but I decided to cover this as well because it is still being used in many older projects. So in the upcoming videos, we will see what's the new thing, and that is called the activity results API, and it has replaced the start activity for result. So in the upcoming videos, we will take a look at how activity results API work. So that's it for this video, and I'll see you on the next one.